And it's so important to me to really speak about this as an EMDR therapist, because EMDR, first of all, in itself, on its own, is an integrative approach. So when Francine Shapiro developed EMDR, it already has within it elements of somatic psychology, elements of psychodynamic psychotherapy. Obviously there's cognitive behavioral components to this. There's mindfulness integrated within this. So it's already an integrative approach.
In this video, I am talking with Dr. Arielle Schwartz about her new book, The Complex PTSD Treatment Manual. Dr. Arielle Schwartz is a clinical psychologist, EMDR consultant, somatic psychotherapist, and has been teaching all over the world about trauma, EMDR, and somatic psychotherapy. She is the author of 5 books, including the Complex PTSD Workbook, EMDR Therapy, and Somatic Psychology, which she authored with Barb Mayberger, the Post Traumatic Growth Guidebook, and most recently, the Complex PTSD Treatment Manual. Her integrative mind-body approach to therapy includes relational therapy, parts work therapy, somatic psychology, EMDR therapy, and therapeutic yoga for trauma. You can find a lot of her yoga videos on YouTube. In this interview, we will explore the difference between an integrative and eclectic approach. We will talk about the difference between PTSD and complex PTSD. So what makes PTSD complex? We'll discuss the social engagement system and why it's so important to understand it when treating complex trauma. We will also talk about how to improve the preparation phase with relational resourcing and a lot more. So here's the interview. Dr. Arielle Schwartz, welcome to the Art and Science of EMDR, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Arielle, I want to start by talking about your new book, The Complex PTSD Treatment Manual, an integrative mind-body approach to trauma recovery. So it's a brand new book, and I want to say that I read the book and I was, first of all, impressed with how much useful information you give in this book in under 175. I think it's 173 pages that you, page 173 is where you write the conclusion. And what I really like about the book that it's comprehensive. So we get a lot of good information. We get the most important theories like the polyvagal theory, the HPA axis, but that's not where it ends. We get really good tools to work after we understand the theories. Another thing that I really liked was that you bring examples, your own personal examples with clients, and every chapter ends with healing practices. So it's specific scripts for that specific chapter. I was not the only one who was impressed with your books. So on the cover of the book, Janina Fisher writes that Arielle Schwartz has written the guidebook for clinicians seeking to understand complex PTSD and how to treat it. So I appreciate your time today, and I want to talk to you about the book. And I want to start by asking you a simple question. What is the difference between PTSD and C-PTSD, and what makes trauma complicated? Or when does PTSD become C-PTSD?
Yeah. Really, you're asking this great question about the whole continuum of traumatic stress. And maybe even if for a moment, if we back out of the word disorder and just hold that to some degree in our modern world, certain amounts of traumatic stress are inevitable, right? Certain amounts of exposure to high levels of stress. Here we are with 18 months into this pandemic, and we've all been under the weight of chronic and repeated ongoing stressful time period, right? So what are we really speaking about here? First of all, when we're experiencing any kind of stressful or traumatic situation, it has an impact on the body, it has an impact on the mind, it has an impact on our emotions. And ideally, we have opportunities to be able to process that, right? And this word process, what do we really mean? We have a way to kind of think about, reflect about, let the emotions move through us, let our bodies kind of metabolize this. And when we think about digesting life events, we're really trying to tease apart what is nourishing to me and what's not good for me, what's waste, right? And we allow that to be separated, and we allow ourselves to release or let go of what no longer serves us. And ideally, we have a supportive enough environment, which might be another person or tools that we use for ourselves, right? Time in nature, or for me, I love my yoga mat, but we have tools to kind of move through the impact of those events. And when we don't have that kind of support, then what starts to happen is that the impact of those events start to accumulate within us. And sometimes what we get exposed to is something really big, really intense, right? Maybe it's a car accident. Maybe it was, a shooting. Maybe it was a fire or a flood, right? And something impacts your world in a very big way. And it's normal to feel shaky or agitated or panicky after that happens. And ideally, once again, we have a way to process that, metabolize it, move it through the body. And, what sometimes happens is that we get afraid of those very symptoms and we want to make it go away, right? Maybe we take a medication. Maybe we're seeking someone to take this feeling away from us. And so as a result, we push it down. So if we don't have those places to work it through, the body is basically still carrying the impact. The mind might still be carrying it. We have images, or we have, we startle easily. We start to not sleep well. We start to avoid places or people that remind us of it. So then we start to see post-traumatic stress disorder, right? And it's not, again, a disorder of the individual. It's really a lack of sufficient support. Mm-hmm. And when we're looking at complex trauma, we're really looking at the impact of chronic and repeated stress over time. And sometimes it's an accumulation of what we'll call those kind of big T traumas, those big events, where maybe it's ongoing abuse during childhood, ongoing experiences of neglect, being a child where there's domestic violence happening in the home, and there's that ongoing barrage of things that you are helpless to change. A parent is using substances and there's nothing you can do about it. Or in adulthood, maybe it's an experience of being in a domestic violence relationship yourself, or maybe it's the experience of, an ongoing experience of being in captivity or held hostage, or feeling unsafe in your country, right? So we can look at all this range of types of things that can contribute to that ongoing accumulation. And sometimes it's really subtle. I have so many people that don't even realize that they have complex PTSD who reach out to me after coming across a piece that I've written, a blog or my book, and they go, oh my gosh, you're describing me, you're describing my life. I'm walking around with this vigilance, with this avoidance, with struggles with interpersonal relationships, with struggles with lack of a sense of worthiness. And I didn't know where it came from because I'm a fish and this was the water I was swimming in. I didn't know there was something else. So it's a long answer to your question, but it gives a sense of that whole continuum.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I want to ask, is complex PTSD more likely to happen for people who experience childhood trauma, abuse, and neglect?
Yes. And it's that because the nervous system and our kind of psychological sense of self and our attachment is forming in those early years, that if we don't have that secure base, it's kind of like trying to build a house on a faulty foundation, that
Mm,
there's a way in which we're constructing a sense of self, but the core felt experience or sense of identity has these fragments or cracks in it. And so then maybe I go through the world and I enter the military, or I'm walking through my life and I enter into relationship, and then these relationship struggles start to happen, or I'm going through my work and I'm really good at what I do in the world, but then I get fired and everything falls apart, right? And so sometimes it's not until something else has happened later that these cracks in the foundation are now revealed.
yes.
And I'm struggling with sleeping, or I'm crying all of the time, or I'm having panic attacks, and we start to take that early history, and it's like shining a flashlight into those dark places.
Yes. I want to ask, again, in the beginning of the book, right in the introduction, and this is something that you write that's very dear to my heart. You write that therapy is always a combination of head and heart, of science and art. Can you explain why?
Yeah. So there is this, kind of magical gift that comes into play when we have the honor of being a companion along someone's healing journey, right? Like, as therapists, we are really given that kind of sacred opportunity to walk alongside someone and to hear their challenging experiences in life, and also their the beauty of their inner heart and the beauty of their meaning making in the world. And I think that so often as trauma therapists, we get given these protocols and we want to learn how to not do harm, and we want to learn what really is effective and what's research based. But if we get so driven by diagnoses and protocols and trying to adhere to that, we're losing this connection, that sacred art of connecting to another human, which requires a certain openness to letting go of what you know, to really be informed by the worldview of the other. And then there's this beautiful exchange where I have my expertise from my degree, right? But you or the client has your expertise from your lived experience. And then we have that kind of beautiful alchemical reaction that can occur when there's enough room for that exchange. One of the things that I love so much about this work is that I'm changed too. Right? When
Right.
someone brings their story, it's like this gift that allows me to learn and grow as well.
The gift of therapy. As you say that, I'm thinking about Irvin Yalom and how he talks a lot about how, it's not just the client that is changed
That's
through the
right.
process of therapy. Thank you so much for saying that. I think it's really important. I want to go back. So the Complex PTSD Treatment Manual and Integrative Mind-Body Approach to Trauma Recovery. So what is the integrative model, Arielle, and what is the difference between integrative approach and eclectic approach?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. I just recorded my presentation for the EMDR conference this year, and I'm doing a kind of long, extensive introduction to this integrative approach there. And it's so important to me to really speak about this as an EMDR therapist, because EMDR, first of all, in itself, on its own, is an integrative approach. So when Francine Shapiro developed EMDR, it already has within it elements of somatic psychology, elements of psychodynamic psychotherapy. Obviously there's cognitive behavioral components to this. There's mindfulness integrated within this. So it's already an integrative approach. And what we really mean by the word integrative as opposed to eclectic is that integrative is a well thought out methodology. That if we're bringing in, and in this integrative approach that's in this book, it's bringing together EMDR, of course, it's bringing together somatic psychology, relational psychodynamic, relational cultural therapy, right? We're bringing in parts work therapy, we're bringing in mindfulness, and the integration of complementary and alternative medicine. So it's a very thorough model. But it's also held within the frame of what I always think of as the core kind of structure or scaffolding of trauma therapy is Judith Herman's triphasic model.
Mhm.
That we have our preparation, and we have our safety and stabilization. We have our trauma working. We go into some deeper working, and then we have our integration. And EMDR extends that into an 8-phase model. So the integrative model rests upon that triphasic model and kind of really explains why would we use parts work within a preparation phase or in our history taking phase to really gather a thorough case conceptualization.
Mhm.
And why is somatic psychology going to really help us in preparation, but also within trauma reprocessing, that it can actually really help the body release so that we're not stuck up in our heads, right? So it explores it in a very meaningful way. And eclectic basically means that we've got all of these kind of, pots that we can draw from, and it feels a bit more haphazard.
Yes. Yes, I want to ask you that in the book, you bring an example of a client who showed up to a first session and was restless, and she was talking very quickly, jumping from one subject to another. And then your first response was to notice your own breath and your own physiology. Why is that? Why is that so important to notice our own breath and our own physiology, especially when we work with clients like the one that you described, that restless and, jumping from one subject to another?
Yeah. I'll offer an answer in response to that client example, but I'm going to just say that this is so important for any person that we're working with, that our nervous systems are in a kind of nonverbal dance with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Our somas are exchanging information even without our conscious awareness of it. And so if a client is in a hyper aroused, agitated, or restless state, or if they're shut down, depressed, collapsed, your nervous system is going to have a resonance with those states. And there is, once again, this exchange in which I want to know what it feels like to be you, but I also don't want to lose what it feels like to be in my own regulated social engagement system, my own kind of window, my own zone, right? And so there is this dance between allowing myself to be impacted by the other so that I can really feel what they're carrying inside, but that I can also then use that information. I pay attention and hear of, I realize I suddenly started breathing shallowly. Or, wow, I'm starting to feel a little anxious before that person comes in the room. That's information. Or, wow, I start to get really tired when I'm working with so-and-so. That's information, right? And then we can use that information both to regulate ourselves so that we have a much more buoyant and resilient nervous system, but also to really kind of offer that regulation to the other. And that's what we refer to as co-regulation. And co-regulation always starts with our own self-regulation when we're the lead, when we're the therapist, right? And then co-regulation becomes this dance.
Yeah, you mentioned the social engagement system. Can you say a little more about that and what it means and what we do with it in psychotherapy in general and maybe in EMDR in particular?
Yeah. So social engagement system comes from the language of the polyvagal theory, and it's really referring to the most recently evolved portion of the vagus nerve, which we call the ventral vagal circuit. And that ventral vagal circuit actually has neural connections into the heart, into the lungs, into the larynx and the pharynx in the throat, around the eyes, around the jaw, and in the inner ear. So all of those connections of the vagus nerve have a primary purpose of helping us be socially engaged and socially connected, right? So that, for example, the look in the eyes, the sound of the voice, the voice tone itself, and the breathing rate, and even the heart rate are ways in which we are entraining or dropping into resonance with each other. So when we are tracking our own social nervous system, our own social engagement system, and you realize, for example, ooh, I'm breathing really shallowly, or my heart rate really picked up as I'm sitting with this person, then, I can actually bring myself back into a regulation zone. And that is a felt experience that, again, is the nonverbal exchange underneath the story, the narrative, the intervention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you mentioned the polyvagal theory. So while we're on the subject of Stephen Porges' theory, he also talks about a concept of neuroception, a process that happens under our cognitive awareness. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about neuroception. What is it, and what are the benefits of understanding neuroception to help specifically our clients in EMDR therapy?
Great. So neuroception, if I break down the word for a moment, the ception part of this is the sensory, the sensory nerves. It's our sensory nervous system. So if we look at our nervous system, we have sensory information that is going toward the brain from our senses. We have our external senses, or our exteroception of what we see, what we hear, what we touch, what we smell, what we taste. We have our interoception, our internal senses of the temperature of my body. Am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Am I tired? Am I alert? And we have our proprioception. It's basically, where am I in gravity? Am I sitting sideways, or am I upright in relationship to gravity? So it gives postural awareness. Neuroception is the information of the sensory feedback to the brain of the state of my nervous system. And it's basically, am I safe? Is there a threat? Is there a life threat? Am I in danger? And our nervous system is constantly picking up cues. Once again, if we go back to the vagus nerve, from the voice tone, from the body language, from the look of the eyes, the facial expressions, the gripping of the fist that we might perceive, or the sounds that we're taking in. So we're constantly basically reading our environment and other people, even the information inside of our own bodies. And the nervous system is basically going, if we kind of borrow a stoplight metaphor, right? We're either in like green, we're good, we're safe, we're in yellow, up, some caution, or we're in red, we're in danger. And that is going up toward the brain without conscious awareness. But we can bring conscious perception to these neuroceptive cues. And that is where the magic happens.
Mm-hmm. And how do we do that? And how do we do that? How do we bring that, or how do we help our clients bring that awareness from the unconscious to being more conscious?
Yeah. So a lot of it goes back to tracking, and some of that tracking, once again, is going to be your own body, right? So that you, the clinician, might notice different shifts and changes. And a lot of it's mindfulness based, right? Like just being able to notice, what's happening in here? And some of it's observational, mindfulness, or in the sensory motor psychotherapy arena, this is referred to as embedded relational mindfulness, that there is this kind of shared mindful observations that happen, so that as I'm sitting with another person, I might begin to observe a change in the facial expression, or that they're getting jumpy and agitated, or that they've shifted their eye contact. And very often in psychotherapy, we're not trained to observe or intervene at that level. But when we're trained as somatic therapists, that is actually very important information in the room, just as important as whatever story is being told. So we use, and I have this intervention in the book, we use something called spacious relational awareness, where we slow it all down. And at that moment, I might say, what you're sharing with me is so important. I really want to hear everything that you have to say. But do I have your permission to just periodically invite you to pause so that I can really hear and digest and be with what you're sharing, and that you can do the same? And I might periodically point out to you something that I'm noticing in your facial expression or a change in your voice tone as cues that there might be something that's worth paying attention to. So we need to work collaboratively and basically have our clients buy in to be willing to receive that feedback.
Yeah, is that Arielle? Is that an example of a relational resource? But you just and that
Yes,
example.
and we can actually deepen this
Mm-hmm.
by anchoring that as a relational resource. So we're resourcing each other relationally throughout the work. But once we notice, for example, I'll give one that came up recently. It was that moment of attunement of a subtle shift that happened. And when I brought it to the client's awareness, her first response was, "Oh, wow, I didn't realize it, but I feel kind of dizzy." And so we stayed with that. We stayed with that somatic experience that she was having and that neuroceptive awareness that was now brought consciously to her awareness through my reflection. And then as she stayed with the experience, then there was this opportunity to really feel like we had taken something that had been in hiding, and we brought it out to the light of shared awareness. And she had this recognition of how many times she felt sad as a little girl, but no one noticed. And so now it was like taking that little one out and her finally being seen. And so there was a relational experience that was reparative. And we can actually stay with that. What is it like for you to notice that I'm right here with you? Really seeing that sadness that was in hiding for so long. And as she feels that positive shift, we can anchor that in.
So this is what you're talking about now is co-regulation, right? Is your attunement as a therapist. Can you talk a little bit about why is it so important for us to be able to, I personally think this is one of the most important things that we offer before the protocols, before all the techniques, and it's our ability to co-regulate and be attuned to our clients and what their experience moment to moment. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about why is it so important?
Yeah. I think it goes back to a question you asked earlier, which is that to individuals with complex PTSD, are they more likely to have trauma in early childhood? And so when we look at the first co-regulatory relationship, it is the caregiver-infant relationship. And there might be several caregiver-infant relationships, right? And those are the first learnings of co-regulation or the lack of co-regulation, right? So when someone did not have that secure base and a caregiver was dysregulated themselves, the infant basically is either joining in the dysregulation of the other, regulating the other, right? So they're using their energy to try and regulate the parent, or basically becoming highly self-reliant, or some version of multiple strategies to manage those early attachment dynamics. So the good news is because of neuroplasticity and that we recognize that the brain and vagal tone can actually be changed for the better across the entire lifespan. The co-regulated relationship is an opportunity to actually go back and engage in that nonverbal exchange that's very parallel to a caregiver-infant relational dance, right? So that we're paying attention to the nonverbal signals. An infant can't tell you with their words what they're feeling, but an attuned caregiver is going to watch for the body language and the voice, the sound of the cry, the gaze that averts or that is seeking and is responding to all of those nonverbal communications.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, Arielle, before we say goodbye, I want to ask you a question that I ask every single person I interview. And this is, how do we EMDR therapists get better at being EMDR therapists?
Yeah. So I'm going to give you 3 answers to this one. The first is to do your own work, right? That we truly can only take our clients as far as we have gone in our own psyches, in our own healing. So when you know, like if you have blind spots in your own attachment, those blind spots are going to come right into your work with others. The second is to continue to get consultation throughout. I mean, I am a lifelong consultee and I love providing consultation. And that keeps, well, I always think of it like the water wheel. It just keeps the whole flow moving forward. And the third is keep getting your trainings. Like there's so much beautiful, rich information out there. And so, yeah, we're required to get our CEUs, but they're so enriching. We all know, like we go get a new training and immediately we're re-energized in our practice. So, keep being a lifelong learner.
Yes. Dr. Arielle Schwartz, thank you so much for your time. I highly recommend for all of our viewers and listeners to get the Complex PTSD Treatment Manual. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me here.
Thank you.